Thank you for your participation in the 2022 Clinical Faculty Wellness Survey. We had excellent participation across the School of Medicine with 69% of you returning surveys, and this included strong participation across departments. Shown here are the mean scores for burnout and professional fulfillment in 2019, 2020, and 2022. Both domains are scored on a 0 to 10 scale, where higher scores are unfavorable for burnout and higher scores favorable for professional fulfillment. You'll note that there was an incremental increase in burnout at each time point on these surveys, and the proportion of physicians with a high burnout score increased from 36% in 2019 to 43% in 2022. We actually observed a slight improvement in professional fulfillment scores between 2019 and 2020, and then a decline in 2022, such that current scores are less than 2020, but slightly above 2019. Consistent with national trends, mean burnout scores were higher for women faculty at each of the 3 time points relative to their male colleagues. We see a similar pattern for professional fulfillment, where at each of the 3 time points, women faculty had less favorable scores than their male colleagues. When we look at these data by age, we do see some nuanced patterns. What you'll note here is that the mean burnout scores are higher for physicians under the age of 50, and actually were highest among our faculty age 40 to 49. This is, again, consistent with published literature showing this mid-career peak in burnout 10 to 20 years into a career. When we look at the intersection between both age and gender, we see some interesting results. Younger physicians were at higher risk independent of gender, and mean burnout scores were actually quite similar for both men and women amongst those under age 50. Where we see a substantive disparity in burnout scores is among women and men faculty age 50 to 59, indicating the impact of gender and age have an interacting relationship. With respect to professional fulfillment, a somewhat similar pattern where less favorable scores amongst those under age 50. And again, where we see the disparity in professional fulfillment based on gender, it seems to be most pronounced among faculty age 50 to 59. On this slide, I've summarized the variability in experience by clinical department. Each row represents one of the 18 departments at Stanford. They're blinded here because our point on this slide is to illustrate the variability in experience rather than to simply determine who's at the top or bottom of this list. The second column illustrates the difference in score among physicians in that department at Stanford relative to our benchmarks for academic physicians in similar specialties across the US. The one caveat is that our benchmark data was collected prior to the end of 2021, such that it's not perfectly contemporaneous with the time point at which we administered the survey in April of 2022 at Stanford. You'll note that we have one department that's scoring markedly favorable relative to their colleagues nationally, and 4 specialties scoring unfavorable relative to their peers nationally. The third column compares the experience for each department in 2022 relative to their own experience in 2020. You will note that effect size differences greater than 0.2 at the population level here are considered important. And we had one department showing an improvement in score of that magnitude and 2 departments showing a worsening score of that effect size. Similar data for professional fulfillment are reflected on this slide. Here you'll note that we have 3 departments scoring favorable relative to specialty-specific national benchmarks, and 4 departments scoring unfavorable relative to their colleagues nationally in the same specialty. And once again, illustrating the variability in experience at Stanford across departments. When we look at changes in each department in 2022 compared to 2020, you'll note that we have 2 departments with a meaningful improvement in score and 2 departments with a meaningful worsening in score. Next, let's look at some of the driver dimensions that contribute to burnout and professional fulfillment. You'll note here the different rows illustrating changes in leadership behavior score, EHR satisfaction, perceived efficiency of clinical practice, the impact of work on personal relationships, sleep-related impairment, teamwork scores, self-valuation, and individual organization values alignment scores. For each of these, higher scores are favorable with the exception of the impact of work on relationships and sleep-related impairment items. You'll note that in general, these scores have been stable across years, with the exception that leadership behavior score initially improved in 2020 and has now declined back near the 2019 levels, and individual organization values alignment has shown a downward trend over the 3 time points. When we look at each of those dimensions in comparison to national benchmarks, you note that at Stanford, our overall leader behavior scores are favorable to national benchmarks, while our individual organization values alignment scores are slightly unfavorable relative to national benchmarks. This slide looks at a heat map with the different driver dimensions illustrated as columns and each department in rows. The red-green colorization indicates how that department is scoring in the respective domain relative to other departments at Stanford. You'll note that some departments, like the department in row A, is scoring favorably in all of these domains, whereas other departments, such as Department M, is scoring relatively unfavorably in each of these domains. For other departments, the profile is quite nuanced. If you consider Department J and compare that to Department O, the things that are working well in Department J tend to be pain points in Department O, and vice versa. And this illustrates why the interactions and the improvement efforts need to be tailored to some extent in each department to address their specific needs. You will soon be seeing your department-specific data. The department-specific reports will look like what is presented on the screen, where you will have a fuel gauge illustrating your department score for both professional fulfillment and burnout, with specialty-specific context from our national benchmarks at other academic institutions. And you'll also see the trend in scores for your department in both of these domains. The report will also contain detailed exploration of the different driver dimension scores in your department. You'll see tables like this one with 3 different versions. The first will compare how your department is doing in each of these domains relative to specialty-specific national benchmarks. There will also be a version of this table comparing your department's experience in each of these driver dimensions relative to other departments at Stanford. And finally, there'll be a version of this table showing how your department's current scores compare to their scores, to your scores in 2020. What happens next? This slide illustrates how additional information will be cascading across the organization in the weeks ahead. Detailed reports on scores for each department will be shared over the next several weeks, as well as detailed reports for each large division. Those data are the first step in an improvement cycle. And your department will be sharing the results with you at an upcoming department meeting. And then the improvement leaders in your department, including your well-being director, will engage you in a conversation about the opportunities to prioritize improvement efforts to address the unique needs of your department. Thank you again for participating in the 2022 Clinical Faculty Wellness Survey. We're grateful for your feedback, and we will work with you and your department to drive change based on the information you've shared. Please also use the email in basket on screen to share with us additional concerns, ideas, or raise personal needs to our awareness so that we can provide support.